Lovely to see you. Welcome and thanks for coming. This is our 13th exhibition of Tim Goulding. I'm not going to say anything about Tim because you all know far more about him than I do. And I'll let Joe fill in the details. Joe Thoma, of course, is a musician, an artist, teacher, and possibly best known for bringing Shane McGowan and the Pogues down to Kenmare. That's enough for me. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you. Okay.
I was asked to introduce Tim. This is Tim. I'll try to keep it short and sweet. So I've known Tim for about 50 years.
50, yeah.
And we met kind of mainly through music, but I remember him having an exhibition in the Hendrix Gallery when we were like, I would have been about 5 or 6. Anyway, so when we eventually met Tim, and the thing about it, I was going to say, but I was told then at one stage not to bother sort of saying this, but the one thing that Elton John and myself have in common is that we both did support a Strangely Strange. But anyway, so there's all that kind of thing. So that was the first time that we met, was at a gig in the All Max in Cork, and we went down to Susan and Tim's house, and so we met you there, and ever since we've had a good friendship.
Yes.
And here we are now, gathered in front of a bunch of people, all of whom know you. And here I'm supposed to sort of start asking. I'm going to talk about your art, but I'm going to get you to talk about your art, and I'm going to start asking you a couple of questions, like as in the story. What's the story, you know? Like, how does it start after, painting? What kind of inspires? Did you get inspired, and along the way of inspiration, do you sort of work on a process of sort of working it all out, or what would you think?
Well, of course, I grew up with a wonderful dad who was an art collector. So I grew up in a house full of paintings, behind the bed, under the bed, behind the walls, every kind of painting. Representational paintings, abstract paintings, you name it. So that was my art education, and I grew up with artists visiting the house, quite a lot of contemporary Irish artists and some international artists. So that was my grounding in art, and it was very natural that I wanted to paint, I suppose. And I remember the first time I wanted to paint was I was going up to visit a friend of ours, Camille Souter, a wonderful painter, lived up on the bog, and I remember going up the hill and looking out on fields down below, and I just thought to myself, I'd love to be able to paint that, which is a pretty sort of normal sort of thing to want. But so I very much became a landscape painter, nature painter, inspired by the likes of Camille Souter and Paddy Collins and that sort of generation of painters. And since then, painting has been a journey in my life. I mean, I've been painting since I was 16. And I was saying the other day because people say my painting changes, which it does, because I think of Joan Miró, the Catalan painter, and he lived near an old railway station, and he found a railway sign, and he put it up over his door, and it said, "No train stops here." And that's the way I work. So, as your life goes on, your painting goes on, and your inspiration comes from that. That's a rather long-winded start.
So yeah, the other thing was, to come to the end of it, is how do you know when painting is going to finish? There is that kind of thing, is there, where,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, Paul Clay said about that. Someone asked him, "How do you know the painting's finished?" And he said, when you're painting, the painting speaks to you. You know, there's a bit of yellow up here, and the painting says, well, it needs to be balanced by a bit of blue down here. And then you speak to it, and it speaks back to you, and you speak to it. And when it stops speaking to you, the painting's finished. And that's the way it really is. Yeah.
so then just talking about these paintings and the work around here at the, can you tell us something about the process of the etchings,
Yeah.
right, and the paintings? They all came around at the same time, or?
They're over a period of about 10 years. There's about 3 series here. There's the Unravel series, that were the first ones to come.
Unravel being how it's shown.
Unravel is my next door neighbour, Rachel, was throwing out an old carpet from our house, and it was completely rotten and falling apart. And she said, would you take it away? And I said, I'd love it. Because to her it was a rotten carpet. To me it was a field of dreams. The most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I brought it home and I started doing some of these paintings that were kind of grid-like. Warp and weft, you can see some of them just there on that. And that's where that series started, and that's what I call the Unravel series. And out of that became the next series. That would have been about in 2003 or something. And then a lot of these further ones came using that grid idea, or that warp and weft idea. I started doing some etchings based on that. And that became the Patching the Void series. Some of these paintings are called Patching the Void. Patching the Void comes from many, many years ago. I spent about a month with a Zen monk, Japanese Zen monk. And one of the Zen, what would you call it, disciplines, is a thing called a koan, whereas the master sets the pupil a puzzle, if you like, called a koan, which is basically something to stop the monk trying to think and sending them beyond the rational mind. I mean, the famous koan is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And another one is, what's the colour of the wind? Or what was the colour of your face before your parents were born? Or if you reduce the many to one, what happens if you reduce the one? These are all sort of impossible questions meant to jog you behind your rational thinking. And so I made up my own one, which was Patching the Void, which of course is impossible. So that series done in that room are mainly the Patching the Void series. And with them I put poems, which are sort of in that area. I don't really call my poems poems, they're more like sort of well, in Spain you get these places up on the high hills called miradores, lookouts, lookout cliff. And these are lookouts where you are at a particular time in your life, at that moment, what the inner life is like. So that's what those poems are about. And they're some of those are with etchings as well back there. Later, yeah.
Oh, no, they're beautiful. Yeah, the etchings are beautiful. The process of it is just there's a series of
yes, there's
books.
six.
There's a book, isn't it?
There's a portfolio of six etchings with the poems beside them printed in letterpress.
One particular one, that sea is a lovely poem. But
then
later
later
have you read them? Have you seen them?
Yeah. Then also later on, now there's a much later series, which are these ones, because back in 2003, I was up in Dublin in a bit of a crisis, and I met my wife, Georgina, and just getting to know each other. And I said to her one day, would you like to go around the world? And it works every time. So we did go around the world, and we spent about 4 or 5 months going around the world in the most beautiful places on earth, Tahiti and the Marquesa Islands and Mexico, and dream places. But instead of sort of painting that, I spent most of my time looking at old plaster walls. And I mean, this would be one. So a lot of these paintings are based on looking at textures on walls. Yeah.
These are the paintings.
Yes, that was a Spanish. That was a Mexican one. That was in Spain.
And the one that behind you is that.
That's more of the Unravel series, really.
Yeah.
Rachel's old carpet. So that sort of shows you the 3 series in this exhibition.
Yeah. And then the poems, they just like anything, they just
The
like
poems,
tunes, like pieces of music you write as well.
yes.
And poems.
Well, I've written about 5 of these books, which are selections of poems which I write. I'm about to do a new one, which are sort of snapshots in time. I don't call them poems. And in this one, at the beginning of this, I quoted something from the Japanese poet Ryo Kan, who lived from 1758 to 1831. I know the feeling. And he said, "Who says my poems are poems? My poems are not poems. When you know that my poems are not poems, then we can speak of poetry." And that's how I speak of my poems, because they're not really poems, they're just snapshots.
It's confusing.
Yeah. But I was going to ask Joe, now, he's my what's it, comprade? No, what's the word? Spanish word.
Compadre.
Yeah. What is it?
That's a compadre.
Compadre. Compadre in music as well. And I was hoping he might end this little discussion.
Yeah, sooner rather than later. And anyway, yeah, on the occasion of Georgina and Tim's wedding, I wrote a little tune called Cod's Head.
Cod's Head, where we live, yeah.
And so he insisted that I bring the fiddle over and entertain you all for a year. And earlier, we tried something earlier, yeah. And it's the Cod's Head. And Tim lives on the most beautiful part of the Beara, called the Cod's Head.
Yeah.
Surrounded by water and gulls and things like that. So I was thinking, actually, when we came in here, I started getting kind of into a type of, get an atmosphere going. First of all, I'll congratulate the lads here on another beautiful exhibition. And every exhibition we come to, it's amazing. Amazing space, beautifully hung, as people were saying. And the other thing was, who was it? It was Mary Duffy, I think it was, had an exhibition in the Butter Market in Kenmare. Do you know of the artist?
Yeah.
And she was wearing a very fetching frock, which was white with red polka dots on it, right?
Black with it.
It was black, actually.
That's the black that's white.
What was the absence on you? There was the anyway. So that she, at the end of, I can't remember who opened it, but after about an hour or so, she gave a little introduction to herself, and she mentioned her frock, and she said the reason she wore it was because of the red dots.
Oh, right.
I thought it was brilliant. Yeah. So, and I was going to say that the prints, for a start, are they're usually on the series, but they're very affordable and very precious. These prints are beautiful. So whatever about the paintings and affording the paintings, boy, some of the prints, do you know what I mean? Like,
The last year prints.
There's There's sandwiches and wine down there. So.
Thank you.